Hi there, welcome to this Facebook Live practice clinic. As you arrive into the room, please do let me know where you're watching from. It would be lovely to see those smiley faces and those hearts and everything else that goes on in a live Facebook. I can see that Betty's there. Hi Betty, nice to see you. Let me just explain a little bit about what goes on in these clinics in case you're new. Janet, hi there. People send, when I say people, I mean subscribers from the online academy who are indeed people, send questions in advance that are practice related or piano problem related, I should say. And I just address the questions here in the clinic and hopefully give people a few ideas about how to proceed and how to progress and how to solve certain issues that we find. Hi Michelle, and there's John. And I hope this will be a useful forum for those of you who subscribe to the Online Academy. Details are in the description below. And if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button so you'll just hear about everything that we're doing as they come out, because we create new content all the time. So let me go straight into the questions. And the first question comes from Catherine, who says, I'm reviving a piece written by Ronald Binge called Elizabethan Serenade. Now, the first problem I'm going to have with this is that this is a copyright piece and I'm not therefore allowed to sit and play it. So I'm going to have to do this in a little bit of a long-winded way. I can play little bits of it, but I can't play a chunk of it for you. So with that in mind, Catherine, let me just go into your first question. I'm having misgivings with bar 5 right hand where the sixths move by step a lot. And then Catherine's asking whether to use, in this instance, the fingering, whether to use 5-2 or whether to use 5-1 on the B flat. Now, I think both of those fingerings could work. The problematic position there would be if you kept the hand. Can you see how I'm keeping my hand in the same position for both this interval and this interval? I can't actually do it. Let me see if I can force my hand to do that. A lot of people are doing this sort of thing. They notice that they could actually keep their hand in that place and just play both notes or both pairs of notes in one position, and they think, well, intuitively that feels right. Well, maybe it does in some way feel right. The problem with it is that it causes the hand to feel uncoordinated, and then we get tension issues and then control issues, because this position, the position I would use for 4-1 on this interval, is subtly different from the 5-2. Can you see when I go from one to the other? Not. So if I were to use 5-1, I would need to move further in and a little bit further up. Both fingerings feel good to my hand. So just avoid that fixed position there, Catherine. The second question Catherine had was about the left hand fingering, which does this. Gently rocking. I wish I could play hands together for you just to show you, but you can look it up on the YouTube. There's some lovely recordings of it. So does Catherine do this 5-2-1-2 and then make a substitution, or does she do this 5-2-1-1? Okay, now either of those would be fine, and this is the interesting thing about fingering. If you're just looking at one fingering from an edition, and you happen to, even if it's a really good urtext edition, and you're looking at the fingering and think, oh, I don't really like that fingering, it doesn't suit my hand, but it must be right because it's in the, some elite urtext edition. You have to remember with any edition of anything, even if the fingerings are by the composer or by the best pianist in the world, they're only one possibility out of many. So you should never be frightened to change fingering. What I advise doing is fiddle with the fingering that you've got there, compare it with another fingering either from a different source or something that you generate for yourself, and just go back and forth and feel which one is actually better for you, and you probably from there you could even come up with your own fingering. Now I'm just alternating. This is the double thumb, this is the change. Now for me, the change fingering, after I went back and forth between the two versions, the one with the change felt more cumbersome than the one with the lift. Actually, I wasn't doing quite, yes, that change. I don't like that in my hand. I would far rather just jump from thumb to thumb, especially as there's a phrase end there. The other thing Catherine's wondering about, she's marked in her score that she sent me, do I do a 4 there, she asks. 1, 4, so that presumably make it easier to get back to the next 5. I personally don't like that 4. I've got a big hand, but that stretches my hand out. And generally what we're trying to avoid doing is stretching. Whenever we can avoid a stretch and use a position that either moves or a position where we can move, it's often the best solution because it keeps the hand nice and free. So again, on the way down, 1, 5, 5. And that's no issue to get from a 5 to a 5. Absolutely no problem. The final part of that question relates to the melodic line when it comes in. Now, I think on the orchestral version, that's the string sections playing that tune. But maybe we could imagine something like an oboe that plays this line. So what I do to create the sound is feel very much that I'm going right into my key. See, the beginning is lifted and light. We have a very well-known television chef in the UK called Delia Smith. Don't know if you've seen her, but I always remember her teaching us all how to make pastry. And she said, just lift as much air into it as possible. And she made these gestures of upwards. And I think that relates very nicely to piano playing. When we've got light music like this, to think up and out. Whereas melodic lines, cantilenas, vocal lines, often need the opposite. We need to feel that we're right inside our key. Right on the key beds, actually, just moving on the key beds. And that gives us that lovely full cantabile tone. I think Catherine's problem is it relates to a long C, so the line kind of finishes 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 before it resumes. And while that note is being held, there's another line in what I would hear as another instrument. So perhaps this is an oboe, and the line that comes in where the two parts, where the hand divides into two, perhaps that's a flute or a clarinet or something. So Catherine wants to know if she can repeat the C, because she obviously doesn't like holding that note as it's dying, But I think if you have two colours, there will be absolutely no issue, and that explains why it's written as a long note. You don't need to repeat it. The ear will hear it. If you give it enough sound at the beginning, we can kind of cajole the ear into still hearing that, especially if we play this line underneath softly, so it doesn't take my attention down. If I were to do this, then I would run into a problem with the texture and the voicing. So I think if you listen to the C, hold it in your ear, you will be able to convince the audience that you are in fact playing two instruments there. It was one of the magical aspects of the piano. I always remember Leon Fleischer telling us that the piano was a magic box, and we are like conjurers, sleight of hand. Now, Adina asks about the Paderewski Minuet. She says, I'd like your opinion. I like that question, opinion, because a lot of these are just opinions. I'd like your opinion on the number of trills to play per note or per measure, starting with measure 65 of Paderewski's Minuet, opus 14. number one, and especially how to coordinate the left hand for eighth notes, quavers on the beats 2 and 3, blah blah, with the right hand trill. And then she asks polyrhythms. Okay, I don't think so, Adina. Let me just go into it a little bit. This minuet is actually rather charming, and as I was researching this, I discovered that there's a video of Paderewski himself from a movie in the 1930s playing this piece. So he's acting himself in this movie, which is quite cute. So, famous piece. The section that Adina's referring to, let me just play a bit of it. There's a long trill in the right hand. Better, but let me look into it a little bit. So I actually don't know how many notes I'm playing in that trill. Is that a terrible thing to admit to? Possibly. Often with trills we let them be free. I would rather let that just do its own thing and let the left hand then lead. Actually, the left hand leads. So we have to know our left hand really well so that we can control it as we play, but also listen to it as we play. Now, the problem with trills, it's two problems a lot of the time. One is mechanical, as in technical. How do we actually do the trill? Are we going to do it with fingers 2 and 3 and do a kind of finger trill, or are we going to use 1 and 3 and do a rotary trill? And that often works nicely with a lower wrist. I'm hoping you can see that. I'll move it down an octave in case my screen is not entirely covering my keyboard. See, with that, I could go on all day doing it. It actually doesn't cost me anything. And because my conductor, my inner conductor, is controlling that, in other words, my arm is playing that trill, I don't actually have to think about it. I can talk to you and not worry at all about what's going on, because once I set it in motion, it just goes. So what you could do is you could start off by just setting it in motion. If you don't have a rotary trill 1 and 3, you could develop it by just starting off very slowly and exaggerating the motions. If I could just show you, let me do it down here. So I'm just making sure my elbow is stable. Yeah, that's important. We don't want any kind of flopping around in the elbow. And I'm just turning my forearm from 1 to 3. Simple, actually, very natural movement. It's just this movement. We saw that a lot over the Jubilee weekend, I think, with the Queen, when she was waving at people. She tends to do that sort of a wave. So she'd probably be a very good triller. I wonder, she is a pianist, she does play. I wonder if she trills. Anyway, let's get on to more serious matters here. Keep when you play slowly, exaggerate the range of motion. And what I would do is to accent first of all the thumb and then the third finger. So I feel the equality between those two fingers. And then I could accelerate it by starting off in quarters and then move to eighths and then triplets, then fours, then sixes. I have to think of this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then eighths. So all of those are kind of measured trills. And then eventually you'll find that you can just do that with no issue at all. If you find that you're getting a little tight, it's sometimes helpful to put a very small wave in the arm. See what I'm doing? I'm just allowing the arm to mobilize a little bit. And of course, with the pedal. Now, does one measure the trill out in the practice? It can be very helpful to measure trills out first in variety of different ways. Let me do the divisions of, well, let me put just 2 notes. could be a possibility to start with. Maybe I'll do 4 notes. And if you choose a fast enough tempo for this piece, and you can't manage any faster for the trill, then you could just stick with 16th notes for the trill, semiquavers. It would sound like this. What would be the tempo? So... It's not the most exciting of trills, but it functions, and if you keep it very soft and even, it will do the job for you. Just 1 or 2 final thoughts on this. So for practice, let's say you've managed to get that trill working beautifully, then just throw in, just take the risk and just throw in a few notes with the left hand. It doesn't have to be the whole left hand. I'm just choosing extracts of the left hand to add to the trill. But in the end, our mind and our ear do not want to be on the trill when we play. They want to be on the left hand where the line is. So not polyrhythms. I don't think so. I don't think we've got the, we wouldn't be able to hear at the full speed. Or, I can't even do it. It's just not feasible, I don't think. Okay, Christian has a question about Schumann's Kinderszenen, number 3, the Hasche-Mann, the game of tag. Now, he has an edition where the metronome mark is 138. Now, I happen to have dug out a number of, I've got several editions of this on my shelf. Yeah, it seems like 2 of them have 138 and 1 of them has 126. But please do not be a slave ever to a metronome mark, even if it's the composer's own metronome mark, because it totally depends on several factors actually. One is the resonance of the space that you're playing in. Let's say you're playing a very dry piano in a very dry room. You'll need to probably play a bit quicker. If you're playing in a cathedral, as I once had to do, you have to play slower. So any resonant acoustic will necessitate lighter pedals and slower tempos. It's just a fact. And it's not only that. I often find people come with an idea that it has to be a certain speed. It has to be 138. If it's 136 or 140, then it's wrong. It cannot be precise like that because there's so many variables. So please don't be a slave to that. Feel what the music, look at the metronome mark and compare different metronome marks from different editors if you can. But the question is this: 1, practice finger staccato and flexible wrist, but I'm making only slow progress with speed and can only get up to 90, he says there. How do I get the piece up to speed without losing a very crisp staccato? This seems to be a touch I simply do not yet have in my finger. I love the way you put it, yet, in brackets, yet have in my fingers. Okay, let's have a little look at it. So the edition that I've got here, it gives a weird thing. It's asking for a 3 to go over here, yeah, which is fine, but I wouldn't even do that because the pedal will go down for the first beat. So I can lift my right hand and then just move across. And the same for the next one. So do you see what I did there? I did not try to make any join from that B to that C sharp, which is not to say that you couldn't. You might actually prefer, to do that. I personally don't, because I don't really like that. It doesn't feel comfortable to me to make that crossing when I don't need to do it, or rather it's more convenient to use my pedal and then just shift the hand across. Now how do we manage at the speed that pattern of staccato 16th notes? Okay, now let's just look at it a little bit. the first thing I would do with any kind of finger staccato is notice first of all the dynamic is piano. The sforzando here, piano now. It's not, but very light. So let's look at it. The first thing I would do would be to play with an articulated tip, the tip of my finger. Okay, now Christian's, I happen to be able to read this comment. Christian says the crossing is fine for me. Okay, so then that's no issue. So if the crossing is fine for you, you'd need to get your arm round here, because actually what happens in addition to the articulated fingertip, there has to be some choreography in the arm. I find a little wrist circle here is helpful for the first group. So if I play that legato, can you see how I'm choreographing that? Down and round, up and over. So I'm pulling up on my pinky. Up, then another little circle here. No. If I would first play it legato with that choreography, maybe even at the speed, then I add my staccato tips. Now what that feels like when you're playing at that speed, it feels like scratching. And you could even do little loops. So my hand is not immobile. I'm not trying to do, that's starting to pull. I can feel that. Just little, it's small, it's just mobility that I'm after there. Yes, now there are so many different fingerings. Christian asked about the fingering by Godowsky in bar 4. Yeah, now the thing with bar 4 is that if you're doing a next door fingering 5, 4, 3, 2, then you have to hop 2 from the A sharp to the F sharp. Now, I don't have a particular problem with that, because with any jump, it depends on the note before the jump, how you release that key. So if I've got a certain firmness on my second finger, then I can propel myself off and land on the F sharp. I could go wherever I want on the keyboard, so that's no distance. Now, I think it's Godowsky or one of these editors tries to get around that by doing this fingering 5, 3, 1, 4 to avoid the jump, and that's perfectly fine. There's no problem with that, but you'd probably find that you need a slightly different position of your elbow than if I'm doing a 2, my elbow needs to be here. If I'm doing this fingering with a 4 there, then I need to be a little higher. So it really all depends on personal preference again, but choreography is all important. You know, I'm reminded of the quote by Leonid Nikolaev, who was a great Russian Soviet era piano teacher, pedagogue, who used to say, don't do anything in the arm without the fingers, and don't do anything in the fingers without the arm. In other words, it's a combined job, fingers and arm working together in whatever ways we do that. And there's so many different ways of coordinating arm and finger. So I hope that gives you some thoughts there, Christian. The final question is from Stephen, who is asking about variation 3 in the B-flat impromptu of Schubert. He says he finds it very difficult to control. My left hand sounds clunky and it drowns out the right hand, made harder because of the piano dynamic. Would you please suggest some practice ideas? Thank you. Okay, well, we've got to look at first of all what the piano dynamic is in relation to this section or this variation. And the reason I mention it is because, you know, the piano in the variation 2 is probably a little bit lighter and more dance-like. And he uses the same letter, P, for this very thick textured, almost funereal. There's something very dark about that. I get a long line in the right hand, which has an octave sonority. If you look at the way that that's constructed, it's not just a pinky tune, it's a thumb shadow. So if I missed out the middle notes, I've got to be able to hear these octaves. And if that wasn't enough for Schubert, he wanted yet more substance in that right hand. So he adds other stuff here to add intensity to that G flat that reaches the forte piano. So don't try and match the decibels. If you're thinking of piano as in terms of decibels, I think that's already problematic. Because actually, it just means gentle, soft, as in gentle, not as in, like if you imagine you're driving and you hit a sign that says 30 miles an hour or 30 kilometers an hour, whatever, and you go 32, you're going to get a ticket if you're caught on speed camera. It's not that. You can never say P equals a certain number of decibels, but it's more of a mood, and it totally depends on the textures that we find. I mean, the left hand, if you look at what the left hand contributes, it not only contributes the basses, sometimes in octaves, other times in single notes, and let me just play that together. And this is a great thing to practice. Just the basses and with the line. So the left hand not only contributes the bass, but also something rather agitated. Kind of breathless and rather disturbing in a way, in a dark sort of way, in triplets. So there's a line there as well. I wouldn't call it it's not one of Schubert's greatest tunes by any means, but we've got this. It's more of a theme, isn't it, there, that goes against the line on the top. So in terms of practicing, so I've already suggested with our pedal that we practice the right hand together with the left hand basses and just balance that up. So the bass, the pinky finger or the octave in the left hand is firm enough to support the sound in the right hand. But you see, you could also practice just the right hand by itself, deconstructed. So you could take the top line and make it as beautiful as you can, like a singer would sing. You could play the thumb line by itself if you wanted, making sure that's subdued. I'm dotting that, sorry. And then you could even do the right hand minus the thumb, just so you can hear the insides. If you really wanted, you could miss off the top finger and just play the... All of these things are worth exploring. Just deconstruct and then reconstruct afterwards. Now the left hand, kind of interesting. I think first thing I would want to do is to make sure I can get from my bass note comfortably and freely to the next position, the first position. So what I would do is, I call this technique springboarding. What I'm doing is I'm jumping off the octave and landing on the chord. So that feels like, I've never been on a diving board, and I never will. Because it looks kind of scary, but the idea is that when you jump off the diving board, there's a kind of free landing, and just check that the wrist is nice and free when you land. By which I mean not moving it around, but just making sure it's not tightened up. And then you'd want to make sure you can get from the last note of the group of chords back to the next bass note. So you can do a bit of springboarding practice. And then maybe repeat the bass note to make sure that that's really secure. I would certainly want to make sure that that freedom was built in. Other thing, with these chords, you need to voice them. You can't play them all grey, like as a block. Let me see if I can do. Can you hear how heavy that is? So actually, the predominant line on the top, if you want to get an idea of the sound, just let two hands do that. And then alternate until they sound the same. So the two hands teach the one hand how to do it, because it's like a demonstration from a teacher. You hear a demonstration from a teacher and you immediately, you've got the sound in your ear, and then you can create that. So I just happened to see, Joe's asked, what Schubert piece is this? It's the B-flat Impromptu Variation 3, the Rosamunde variations. Right now, let's see, where were we? Now, there are other things that you can do to get the voicing working. This may not appeal to everybody. It's a little bit what falls into the category of mechanical practice of the sort that we might find in an Alfred Cortot edition, whereby I just repeat the lower two notes twice. That encourages me to lighten those fingers and to firm up the top finger. I think that's quite a useful thing to know about, even if you don't really use it too much. It's quite helpful. Now, let me just show you another thing. Let's say you wanted to follow that idea a bit further. Do it with the top finger. Firmer. Play the top finger twice. You could even do it with the middle finger. Just pick one finger, let's say the fourth finger. So I can hear some of you say, well, no, I haven't got time for that. That's too mechanical. It may be, but it's one of those things. It belongs to a slightly old-fashioned way of practicing that I think it's very craftsman-like. It's based in craftsmanship, and it does get us to focus on every detail. It really does help us to know that left hand. So I think that's what I would do. And then be able to play, actually the other thing I meant to mention is the pedal in this particular passage, and it isn't black and white pedaling. It's not on or off type of pedaling. I mean, let me try on or off pedaling. So I'm going to put my pedal down with each bass note and keep it. That's really unskillful. I can't even go on with that. But where do I lift the pedal up? If I don't hold it through to the next bass note, what do I do? Well, I don't think I would lift it up completely. I would just find a kind of place in the pedal. I find myself vibrating the pedal, fluttering the pedal, and you may think, well, surely that's really difficult. It is kind of to start with, but when you get used to it, it's second nature. You don't even think about it. Your foot just has a life of its own. It's got a communication link with the ear, and the ear and the foot are kind of in cahoots with each other. And the ear says, it's a little bit too much. And then the foot says, okay. And it just flutters a little bit more, or lifts a little bit more. But I would practice without any pedal at all. It's going to sound horribly dry, but let me show you. I did that. I'm trying to do the best I can without any pedal, so that when I add the pedal, I can just do it little by little by little until I find the right amount. I think that's often better than starting with too much pedal and then paring it down, because actually if we use too much pedal, we can't hear what's going on, and our fingers get into all sorts of horrible habits because actually we can't hear what they're doing. Our fingers are servants. I call these my servants. My ear has to be able to hear or see what the servants are doing in order to change anything. And if I've got loads of pedal there, I'm going to find that job considerably harder. So practicing without pedal is not a completely pleasurable experience because we so want the pedal, but it is a very useful in our practice, particularly when it comes to learning new things. So that's probably a good place to wrap up. I can see that we've got a number of people watching, and the last of whom is Alex. So if I could just wrap up by thanking you all for your questions and thanking you for watching. And I hope it was of some use and some interest. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you again next month in July. Bye for now.